Fredrickson?
Present.
Fuller?
Present.
Glasser?
Present.
Leto?
Present.
Martin?
Present.
Sylvester?
Here. All right. Where am I? Come on over, Ellen.
Okay. And I believe we have no absent members today, so no need to excuse them. Next is the adoption of our agenda. Can I get a motion to adopt the formal agenda?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Fuller.
Support.
Thank you, Leto. All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Next, can I get a motion to approve minutes from the June 27th NFP meetings?
So moved.
Thank you.
Support.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Great. Moving on. Next, we have general citizen comments. If there are any comments from the public, please come forward, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes on the board. So this time is for general comments about NFP, and if you have comments specific to the Hawthorne Village application, we'll have time after the presentation to address those specifically later on in the agenda. Yes, thank you. And Nolan, do we have any callers or messages?
No callers at this time.
Great. And again, we'll have a board discussion about that proposal a little bit later, but for now, are there any comments from the board before we get into that development proposal? Okay, now on to new business. This is for the approval of the NFP site plan for the project located at 209 East Stockbridge Street. I think we'll start with getting a little bit more information about this project from city staff and the applicant.
If I may, I'd like to point out that I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion and any voting on this matter because of a conflict of interest that I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for clearly stating that. I appreciate it.
Fair enough. Yep.
Okay, on to Jamie. Do you have an application or from the applicant?
Yeah, so
Presentation.
in your board packet, you have the full application from the Hawthorne Park. I apologize, it says Hawthorne Village, I think, in your notes, but it's Hawthorne Park, which is located at 209 East Stockbridge Avenue in Kalamazoo, in the Edison neighborhood. We have the applicants here with us today, so if you all would like to come up and start by giving us all the background in the project and some of the scope and what's planned there. Staff will follow up with our staff report, which will really focus just on natural features and the standards and the staff's recommendation to the board. We'll certainly open it up for board questions of either staff or the applicant. And then we'll make sure there's time for public comment then before you guys have your discussion and any voting.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a brief moment to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Wilcutt. I represent the developer on this project. If you have any questions, I'm available, but I'm going to turn it over to Brian McMorrow, who is the engineer on the project, and he will go through the presentation materials with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Brian McMorrow. I'm a civil engineer with V3 Companies in South Bend, Indiana. Our firm was engaged by Lisa and her team in January of 2022. So we've been on the project for about a year and a half. We were not the design engineer on earlier iterations of the project. So we were brought in to kind of evaluate where they were, and also to grapple with zoning changes, which was kind of a moving target, and then the new natural features protection overlay standards, which were either had recently come into effect at that time or about to be adopted. The first slide that I just put up is the title sheet, and on the right-hand column, I highlighted in yellow all those drawings from the set that went to the site plan review committee that was shared with your group. And then in green, I highlighted who I am and Lisa. So again, Lisa's with Lift Foundation, and I'm the civil engineer. Our firm was also engaged to do the tree survey, and we'll be seeking approvals from Eagle and FEMA after we get local decisions as well. Also on the title sheet, it notes that the owner is Kalamazoo County Housing Choices of Portage, Michigan. They're an organization that was established, as the name suggests, to provide affordable housing in Kalamazoo County. Subject property is located in the Edison neighborhood of the city. And then we met last week with the site plan review committee. We had a good conversation with them. They shared with us all of their detailed review comments, and we're beginning to work through them, and we'll also take time, if there's anything that comes out of today's meeting, to revise and resubmit our drawings. If we can go to the next drawing. I don't have a cursor up here, I don't think. There we go. So in the packet that I submitted, and I wanted to highlight today, is this drawing, which we had labeled existing conditions map. It's a color aerial photo of the site and the immediate neighborhood. The source is Google, and it was an aerial photograph taken at current, 2023. Hard to tell on the image, but there's a thin black line that delineates the site. It's a 4.65 acre site that's currently vacant. So on the image, the site begins on Stockbridge, which is the street on the lower portion of the drawing, begins at the Dollar General store, which is in the lower left-hand corner, and runs to that part of the parking lot that's in the lower right-hand corner. Along Lake Street, the property has frontage from John Street, which is a T intersection that kind of runs alongside the police department, and then that vacant lot that appears near the top right-hand corner of the image. In fact, there was a dwelling unit at one time opposite John Street. Again, I mentioned the vacant property on Lake Street that shows on the image. There was a home in the lower left-hand corner next to Dollar General that our client demolished because of its condition a number of years ago. And in fact, if we go to the next slide, a little hard to see here, but this is off of the city's GIS website. It's a historic image that goes back to 1997. And I crosshatched in red all of the ground on these 4.6 acres that was previously developed with other structures and yards and that sort of thing. So there was 3 dwellings. As I mentioned, there was a bar and social club and picnic grove and parking lot. All of those things at one time existed on the property. The area that I've crosshatched in red covers about 1.6 acres of ground. So 1.6 of the 4.6 acres of the property had been previously developed, or about 34% of the tract. It's noteworthy, I think, because when we met with a number of neighbors that were invited to a meeting a few weeks ago at the Edison Neighborhood Association, there was a request that the city should only be considering applications for redevelopment projects, not development of vacant ground. So it's important to underscore the fact that this site, at least much of it, was previously developed before. So if we go to the next slide, I've superimposed on that same 2023 Google photo the site plan that we're proposing to construct on the property if we get the approvals from the town and others, from the city and others. So in brown, that rectangle in the lower left-hand corner, that's the building. It occupies about a third of an acre. There's an asphalt parking lot that would be situated just east of it that is about a half acre. Sidewalks and the concrete pad for a trash enclosure is in light yellow. That also occupies about a half acre. There's a playground, that dark olive green triangular shape just north of the building. That's 4/10 of an acre. All told, we're proposing to redevelop 1.8 acres of the site, or about 39% of the tract. So just a modestly more ground that's going to be disturbed for our project if approved as shown. And quite candidly, that includes a sewer extension that the city engineer asked us to take to Lake Street. We're also proposing a semi-pervious trail over the sewer to provide some pedestrian connectivity. I think if that disturbance were taken out of the equation, we'd be at or equal, the land area that was previously developed. Going to the next slide. And this is in your packet, and boy, I'm glad these days, we have color coding and PDFs to share. If we had to try to do this with an old blueprint, this would have been hard. But we've used color to help identify the many environmental constraints that we have to deal with. The blue hatch, which is much of the top of the page, is the 100-year flood hazard areas defined by FEMA. The blue crosshatch, which is kind of in the middle along the left edge there, kind of looks like an eyebrow. That's a 500-year flood hazard area defined by FEMA. And then the green hatch represents woodland areas. So let me explain. I know there's woodland areas in your natural features protection overlay code, and there's also a list of protected trees. So our arborist went out at 2 different times. In October of last year, while there was still foliage on the trees, we had an arborist go out and with the list that's in the code for protected trees, I asked him to tag all of those trees that qualified, basically in the front half of the project. I told him not to be concerned too much about the trees that might be on the list near Lake Street because we had no intention to develop that portion of the tract. So on this drawing, you'll see that we identified 35 protected trees. And again, that's listed there in the upper right-hand corner. We then went out in December, and it was December only because we couldn't get a surveyor to stake the grids. So the code calls for us to have grids set up 21,780 square feet, about a half acre, so that our arborist could do a tree count of all the trees in a particular grid. So he had to go out a second time. The surveyors then not only staked the grid, they surveyed the location and took the tag number of the trees that we had identified earlier. And we did an analysis, again, against the code, and we found that all of those grids that were crosshatched in green, we believe qualify as a woodland area under your code. Now, we had a preliminary meeting with a number of you. I think Jamie was on and 1 or 2 other members a few months back. And there was a distinction made or clarification made that you don't count the protected trees twice. Protected trees that are in kind of an area that's not a woodland would then have to be replaced at a 1-to-1 ratio using the replacement tree list that's in your code. So as it turns out, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but really only one of those 35 stand alone outside of a woodland area and qualify for replacement. I'll get into the planning plan at the end as my punchline. So going to the next slide, the soil erosion and sedimentation control plan again shows the same 1.8 acres of land disturbance. Maybe it's a site demolition plan. Maybe go to the next slide. So same demolition plan, erosion control plan, same limits of disturbance. We have in the bar chart there our tentative schedule. You know, we're looking at, and the start date is also dependent upon funding and financing, but we're assuming for now that we get the full benefit of a construction season next year. So we break ground in the spring, and then should be able to wrap it up before the winter months descend upon us. We've got the stormwater BMPs outlined on this plan. That the rectangle under the parking lot is our underground storm tech chamber that will collect all of the stormwater runoff from every square inch of hard surface that we're proposing, as well as the landscape islands within the parking lot. That is designed for a 10-year, 24-hour storm. The stormwater engineer has concluded that that's the appropriate storage to provide. The system is also designed to provide water quality benefits for that first flush. It passes through a membrane within the system, and then as a belt and suspenders approach to water quality, the overflow, think of it as your bathtub at home. You know, so we've got this underground storage chamber. Near the top, there's an overflow, and once the water reaches that elevation, it then begins to drain through a vegetated swale that we have in the north and east there before it drains to the wetlands. So we've had preliminary conversations with Eagle about that, and you know, that's exactly the state-of-the-art stormwater management BMP that they want to see for development that's adjacent to wetlands. Mm-hmm. So any discharge from our site is going to be pre-treated, not once but twice, and then also discharged at a velocity that's not going to be erosive. So we're not going to be having any erosion of the upland area that we're vegetating, and there should be no adverse impact on the wetlands as well. There was a comment a week or two ago about the temporary construction fencing that didn't appear to be on our drawings. Jamie was right, so whoever picked that up, we didn't have that. We had silt fence all around the site, but we have revised our plans, and the set that's before you today also has the temporary construction fence on the drawing. It's a little different than the specs that are outlined in the code, and I wanted to bring that to your attention to make sure that I'm not doing a bait and switch on you. But the specs that are in the NFP code calls for posts that are 6 feet high, spaced no more than 8 feet apart, with cross beams 2 foot and 6 feet above grade, with a plastic mesh barrier affixed to the front. What we're proposing is just a little different. Posts are 5 foot long instead of 6, and they really come pre-attached to the mesh fencing. So we're going to have one labor or two be able to take a roll 100 feet long and then put the stakes with a sledgehammer. And we believe the flexibility that affords allows us to maximize the amount of trees that we're preserving instead of having to draw straight lines, you know, to put the segments of fence. It's a flexible, patented system that's proven in the marketplace. High visibility green to make sure that laborers and construction equipment, when they're on site, are going to see it, and can be easily, stood back up if, there's a storm damage or something like that for it. So we think it serves the purpose, and in some ways might even be a better spec than the one that's in the NFP code. Going to the next slide, our site layout and paving plan is included in the set. For the most part, it provides the zoning data that the planning and zoning officers needed to confirm or compare what we're proposing against the code. It's worth noting that the impervious coverage number appears in the table. We're proposing 20.2%, whereas under the zoning ordinance, 80% is allowed. So the impervious coverage that we're proposing is well below that, which is allowed by the zoning code. Now, of course, that's for all sites, whether it's environmentally constrained or not. And the semi-pervious coverage, which is that walking trail along the sewer easement out to Lake Street, is 1.1% of the tract, whereas 10% is permitted. One other note I want to make about this version of the drawing that's before you, it was revised from our initial submission in response to comments from the neighbors that we had when we met a few weeks ago. We have eliminated the Lot A and Lot B designation. That was also a comment that came through Jamie that defining the parent tract was also being considered. So we're not reserving the right to develop the land along Lake Street right now. That what you see is what we intend to build and no more. So the back half of the property along Lake Street, which is generally wooded and wetland and floodplain, is basically, except for the sewer, which will go under the ground and then the ground restored to its original condition. Except for that, the site is going to remain as is, the backside. Going to the grading plan on the next sheet. Here we don't have to drill down, although maybe let's go to the grading plan enlargement on the next sheet. But that first one simply showed that, again, the grading all occurs in the same limit of disturbance. But when we zoom in on the contours, if you compare the proposed elevations versus the existing ground elevations, which are half-tone below it, we are basically raising the site by about 3.5 feet. We're doing that for a couple of reasons: to make sure that the finished elevation of any building and the finished elevation of the parking lot is above the regulatory flood hazard elevation, plus a little more, because we understand that what was a 100-year floodplain elevation for years might change. I've experienced where regulatory agencies have looked to increase that because of the more frequent 100-year flood storms that we're getting and climate change. So we're proposing to fill for that reason, and also to make sure that we could get the underground storage chamber to be a couple of feet above the seasonal high groundwater table. So we are going to have the benefit of some infiltration through the bottom. The system is, got openings, and it sits on a bed of stone, and the sides as well, to help recharge groundwater. It's probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the site itself, again, we're only disturbing 1.8 acres. I'm looking for the number here. The watershed, so back to the floodplain. The watershed area that contributes to the floodplain on this property, this is according to the FEMA studies, is 24 square miles, or 15,360 acres of runoff contributes to the flooding that's experienced from time to time, on this property. Our 1.8 acres is 1/10 of 1% of that watershed area. So the reality is that whether the site remains in its current condition and nobody does anything, or we develop it as we propose, it's not going to change in any noticeable or even measurable way the amount of flooding that's on the property. But the benefit that residents and quite honestly the vegetation and the critters who live there is we now have state-of-the-art stormwater management systems that is going to deal with the stormwater runoff that comes from our site and provide all the benefits I spoke of before. Next to the utilities plan. So again, zooming out, we have water service connection out to East Stockbridge Avenue. The sewer connection goes to Lake Street. We have on-site stormwater inlets, catch basins that all run to that underground stormwater management chamber. And then to the last slide, which is our landscape plan enlargement. So with the preserved woodlands to the north, our landscape architect has proposed to group the plantings along East Stockbridge Avenue to provide some visual screening of the building from the street, and then a lot of buffering along that easterly and southeasterly corner of the property. And in part because of the adjacency to that property to the east, and in part because of the view across the street. There's that large city-owned lot that, I don't know what it was, but it's a big parking lot right now. So to help provide a visual screen for that. So, back to that protected tree list and the fact that we've got one tree that we need to replace with something off of the replacement tree list. I didn't prepare the slide, but our planting schedule, I think, which is on the next drawing on the set, provides all of the trees that we're proposing, and all but one is on that list. So we are proposing 12 flowering dogwoods, 3 shagbark hickories, 31 red cedars, and 3 white pines. All of those qualify as being on that replacement tree list. Pick any one of them, and that's the one that would replace the one protected tree that we're removing. So that is kind of a quick overview. I wanted to be able to go through the drawings one by one and help you sift through the volumes of information that is contained in the plans. And I want to compliment the city too. These are challenging times because most of the sites I deal with have challenges, otherwise they would have been developed years ago. But the city has put in place a lot of safeguards to make sure that sites are developed soundly, and I'm proud to stand behind this one and happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for that presentation.
Sure.
I think we have questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Would it be okay if Nolan comes up and gives the staff report on kind of how we evaluated and what the findings are from staff, and then happy to invite either Nolan or Mr. McMorrow back up for questions.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Nolan Bergstrom, community planner. I'll give sort of a general overview of the natural features present on the site, since we had a generous amount of background from Mr. McMorrow. Overall, the site was placed in the NFP overlay district based upon community feedback from local residents citing woodland and wetlands present on site. And staff confirmed the presence of those features during NFP Phase 2. So this parcel or group of parcels in this area were added for that reason. There's also, as mentioned previously, in the northeast area, a large portion of floodplain, not a natural feature covered in the NFP, but still a natural feature nonetheless. So Since the project's located within the NFP overlay district, the site requires the following NFP site development standards. The wetland standard, which is being met. The wetland setback standard requirements are being met on this project. The protected tree standard, 10 protected trees were proposed to be removed, and the plan shows the replacement ratio is met as a part of the standard. The woodland protection standard, the project site requires 50% of woodlands be preserved on the property. The project is proposing to preserve 75% of the existing woodlands, which meets that standard. And then the plant selection within the NFP overlay district, projects must select native species for all landscaping requirements, as mentioned. This plan includes a landscaping plan that you saw briefly with native species. And these plantings can include a variety of native cultivars approved by the board. And then finally, there's stormwater management, which was touched on in the overview, but the channel protection standard and water quality treatment are increased in NFP, and the low impact development method as described in section 50-6.2. These elements are under review for approval by the city's stormwater engineer. So after staff review, the plan appears to meet the NFP standards and qualifies for conditional approval based upon the city stormwater engineer approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Nolan. So I'd now like to invite our other board members, questions, points of discussion, concerns. Go ahead.
I can start us off. So let's start with the grading plan. I had not seen the insert with the enlargement, so bear with me, I'm looking at a little sheet. But there are a few trees that look like they're going to be saved or try to be saved along the north end of the property. However, it looks like the grading is going within the drip line of those trees, as well as the construction fencing. Can you verify that I'm reading that correctly?
Which drawing are you looking
Oh,
at?
I'm on C5.0. However, you might have a more zoomed in copy, an enlargement.
So C50 is fine, yeah, that's the grading plan, right?
Okay.
Would it be possible to pull that back up on the screen
Yeah. If you
Oh,
want,
yeah, that's a good idea.
for our
Yeah,
guests? Yeah.
If you want to just
so that
zoom
was in
in.
my packet as well, yeah, so
Correct.
C5.0.
So up by the dumpster enclosure area on the north property line.
So go back to C50. And actually, we can go to C5.1 to see closer. So there is some contouring that happens north of the dumpster. You'll see that there's a straight line there. That's a boulder dry-laid stone retaining wall. And that is set outside the wetland buffer. And so, yes, there's going to be some woodland removed between the curb in the new parking lot and that stone wall. But that's all accounted for in our limited disturbance.
Okay. So I guess what I'm seeing is tree tag, bear with me, 8152 and 8155. If you could just help me understand, those aren't shown as being removed. I'm concerned that they're not going to survive grading that close to the root system.
Okay, let me.
And-
So I'm looking at C1 1.0 now.
Well, C2.0 has your removals, 2.0.
Right. Okay.
And
So tag 8152.
Yep, and 8155, I believe. They're really faint on our sheet. I apologize. I almost brought my
So 8152 qualified as a tree that, was a tree on the list for the protected trees. It's in an area that is not scheduled to be preserved. Yes, it does appear that maybe that's in the drip line. But, every effort's going to be made to try to preserve that.
Okay. I guess I bring it up because both those, the likelihood of them surviving, maybe they won't die right
Yeah,
away.
I think those.
I just wanted to bring it up that.
Yeah, that evaluation is probably best done in the field by a qualified professional, given exactly what's proposed.
Because ideally,
So-
if you do tree protection, right, you're going out to the drip line.
Right,
And we're
right.
definitely within it.
There is an opportunity to take that dry-laid stone wall and make it coincident with the back of the dumpster, which should then provide a sufficient amount of room. So I'd be happy to agree to make the changes to the plan to improve our chances of saving that particular tree.
Yeah, I'd appreciate if you, could look at those two.
I'm reading this right. I think both those trees are Siberian elms,
Yes.
which are non-native and kind of lower quality. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, I'm not really sure why Siberian elm is on like the protected species list.
It shouldn't be, no.
No.
I don't think so.
I think because it's categorized as woodland, I don't think a
Yeah.
woodland is necessarily
Right.
defined by its
Right.
constituent overstory species. I think if
Right.
it was just the tree standard, then those would probably not be protected, but.
And it's also the size.
It seems to
Okay.
me, again, as a professional, that I didn't have a role in authoring the code, but when I read it, I think the city was looking to achieve a balance here. And the advice I gave to our client when we were engaged is not to try to come right up to the line where the city says, not to maximize woodland loss, but to actually go the other way and make the footprint of our project as small as possible and avoid all impact to wetland fills, floodplain fills. And as Nolan noted, we're preserving 75% of the woodlands, whereas only 50% are required. So, we may lose a couple of trees around the fringe, but I think, again, on balance, we're largely protecting a lot of trees out here.
Yes, I agree. If those aren't something that was required, which it sounds like maybe that evaluation already has been done, it might make more sense to just call them as removals
Yeah.
rather than play the waiting game.
Right.
Thank you. I'm wondering, can you go into a little more detail about those rock walls that you mentioned? I would imagine their function is to bring the site of that elevated 3 foot that you mentioned
Yeah.
to get it out of.
Yeah.
And but I see they're only in very specific spots. Could you kind of elaborate on those
Sure.
features?
So, we first graded, or we set the building elevation and the parking lot an elevation that we could get the stormwater storage that we needed under the parking lot and also the depth. And the resultant transitional grade from that podium, if you will, if we had allowed, I forget if it's 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 graded slope to simply meet original ground, we would have encroached upon the wetland buffer, the 25-foot wetland buffer. So we only need, 1 to 3 feet of grade separation there. So a dry laid, it's not a structural wall, it'll look very natural, allows us to keep the toe of slope from penetrating into that wetland buffer.
So it's intermittent because there's only specific spots where you can't meet
Right,
grade. Okay.
right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Along those same lines, forgive me because I don't have this spot elevation plan, but what back of the wall bottom elevation, like what is that difference from someone standing?
Yep.
Yep.
So we're going to go to the grading plan enlargement for that.
I saw that.
Which should be 5 this one right here. Actually, I have top of wall and finished grade elevations listed there. Again, hard to see. So on the left edge of the wall behind the dumpster, It's essentially the same elevation, so it goes from 0 to the high point, 765 at the top and 62.3 at the bottom, so just 2.5 feet, and then down to nothing on the other end.
Excellent. That's what I was
Yeah.
trying to pinpoint. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a general NFP question regarding plantings. For vegetative swales to slow stormwater discharge for filtration and allow for velocity slowing, does NFP rules have anything to do with what vegetation can be planted in vegetated swales?
I have the code up and I'll go double check that.
Okay. And does anybody do we have any recommendations of what?
I mean, in general, anything will slow it down, but
Right.
you bring up a great point that there's native species have the deeper root systems and will pull that water down and
Yep.
it'll catch more of it. Won't flow off site so fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
And during normal routine maintenance, after the site is developed, you wouldn't want that mowed like a putting green. You want those grasses to grow taller.
Right.
So that's part of the way we deal with it too, is to make sure that there's a maintenance program. And I know the code does require us to enter into a stormwater management agreement. Between you and me, it would be okay if there was some discussion about grass, vegetated swales like that, and not just catch basins and pipes.
Right. Thank you.
I have the code pulled up in front of me, and there is no explicit requirement for any certain vegetative cover for those green or low-impact development type stormwater treatment facilities. It just references, the code references the state's low-impact development manual, which talks about, has a BMP matrix table, and it talks about, looks like more dimensional kind of requirements, but I'm not seeing anything on specific vegetation. But again, we do have that required stormwater maintenance agreement between the city and the permanent landowner.
Yeah, and given our adjacency to wetlands and floodplains, Eagle is going to take a look at it too. So you have a higher authority who's going to weigh in on the appropriate spec.
I just wanted to get some clarity on the tree removal. I think the plan set that we reviewed and Nolan referenced it said there would be 10 trees removed, but now you're saying 1.
So one that's outside of the woodland.
Okay.
Yeah, the others are contained within woodland areas.
Okay, so they're still being removed, but they're
Yeah,
being considered
right,
woodland.
right.
So which is the one that is being removed
It's-
as part of the tree standard?
It is near the front, so it shows up on. C1.1.0. If we can get back to that, maybe.
Is it 8129?
Yeah, 8129.
Okay, and that's a Norway spruce. it
Right,
looks
it was a
like.
no,
Okay.
right.
And I also have some information about those, the Siberian elms, correct? They're not listed as an individual species that's considered protected, but those individuals were over 24 inches, and so regardless of species, it's considered protected when it's on a site that it does not
Right.
coincide with, woodland. So that was probably how that first arborist came out and flagged it
Right,
because of its size.
Right.
I have another question related to the discharge to the wetland, so that will be treated under the parking lot, but there will be an overflow that may go to the wetland. And this maybe is more a question for the stormwater folks. Do we have a sense of what that wetland can hold before there's a flooding issue for the neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, it can take all the water we can give it. I mean, the wetlands love the water, so that we're not harming the wetland by discharging. And like I said, there's 25 square miles upstream that is contributing runoff and water that stands down there.
I just know we've gotten a lot of comments from the neighbors about flooding, and so, yeah, I just don't know what the capacity of that wetland.
I can certainly pass that comment along to the stormwater engineer who will review the site. I do appreciate the idea, though, that when we get flooding in this region, it's going to be from a pretty substantial rain event. So if it's enough to probably overwhelm that wetland from this site, I think all of the other watershed has
Right.
probably already kind of, caused that surface flooding anyway.
Yeah.
But I will bring that up to the stormwater engineer, and we can talk about it through that level of approval.
If I can add to Director Fuller's comment, that's what I was thinking about as well. We've got a lot of community feedback about flooding in this area. Obviously, every site plays a role, even if it's small. I think what I'm hearing from you and what it seems like is that this site is maintaining responsibility for its own footprint, and I think what we just would want to avoid is that it's contributing anything additional to the site that wouldn't already be contributed in its current state. And so I think that's the kind of context I'm thinking, just as long as we're not creating additional stress on an overburdened, ecological function in the landscape.
And I can speak a little bit to our city's stormwater code generally, which applies here, and plus there's a bit more of a higher standard. But because this project or parts of this property were previously developed, we still see an overall improvement in stormwater treatment, capture and treatment. A site is only allowed to claim 50% of the pre-developed area, and so it has to assume that the other 50% was woodland, even though it wasn't in this case or isn't in this case. So we do get an overall positive by like 50% on these sites that were formerly developed and are vacant, but then get redeveloped. The next development, when they're doing their stormwater calculations, they can't claim all of that. They have to sort of restore to a higher, a lower impervious surface, if that makes sense.
Yep, thanks.
I have another question about, and this is maybe again for Jamie. It's about the parcels. How many parcels was this originally? A
It
lot.
was contained in your report. There was a lot of them.
Yeah.
It was the opening line in your report, Jamie.
So they have not yet been combined,
They need to be combined.
but they
into
will
one.
be.
Right.
And is that, I'm not recalling other projects where we've had this issue. I'm just thinking the math changes when if you're reviewing individual parcels versus the combined parcels, and I'm trying to figure out how we as a board approach that. Like I said, I don't remember doing it before, so.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that actually NFP staff talked to our larger site plan review team about. There is sort of a standard or a consistent way we look at these sites when we have developments that are taking multiple parcels and will be combining. We always want to see that the standards are met based upon the dimensions of the new lot, right? You can imagine it's also very difficult to figure out setbacks when you have all these parcels. So we make sure that parcel shape that it's going to take on post-construction, that's what we evaluate the whole property on. And then applicants are required to make sure they have a letter from the city assessing department that says, upon our review, these are eligible to all be combined in this configuration, and then that happens usually in the next tax year. So that's how we've always addressed it, that we evaluate everything based on what the new parcel configuration looks like afterward. And you can imagine we've had some that have gone forward that are maybe proposing multiple parcels be combined into two parcels. We have to make sure we don't have a building that crosses those two parcels, because you can't sell the parcels separately then with half a building. You want to make sure that the stormwater facilities is somehow contained on site so that somebody doesn't sell a parcel later and there's no stormwater treatment. Parking requirements are very similar. So it's a pretty common occurrence that parcels are going to be reconfigured in some way. And so we want to make sure that all the zoning rules, including NFP, can be met with that new parcel configuration.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I'll add to support what you're saying, Jamie. You know, there's that defined term parent tract 2, which anticipated that there'd be development applications for more than one parcel and think of them together. So,
Okay. And because there is stormwater conveyance to that wetland, it sounds like that couldn't be split apart then from that southern parcel now. So this is, now that it's combined, it's not gonna, like, the next developer comes in and says, oh, I'm gonna split these and develop this chunk with a different set of math, right? Okay.
Right.
Thank you. That was one of my concerns as well. I kind of want to stay on the stormwater track before we move on to plants and other things. Do we feel comfortable where we're at with the stormwater conversation, or do we have more questions about that?
I actually have another one. For the, I'm gonna call them rain gardens in the parking lot islands, how is rain entering those? Is it drop catch basins? Is it sheet flowing in?
All of the catch basins sit in the paved areas of the parking lot. And I know there was some discussion at our neighborhood meeting. I guess there were other projects in town where porous pavement was part of the solution. This project does not have porous pavement, so it's a traditional parking lot. All the water is captured by the catch basins in the parking lot, and then all of it is diverted into that underground chamber before it's ever released to the wetland.
So does it drain from the parking lot into those islands, or does it drain?
No, it doesn't drain into the islands, no.
Oh, okay.
No.
I'm happy I asked. I was making an assumption there, so thank you. So, wait, let me back up. So the pre-treatment before it goes in the wetland is being performed underground in that system? Okay, thank you.
Did you mention a swale, that it would go through a swale at some point?
Yes.
I may have. But that's only at that emergency overflow. Is there a swale, a vegetated swale to the wetland?
Okay.
And that would be to the north side of the
Yeah,
parking lot?
that's right.
Okay.
You know, it's designed to capture all of the runoff for every storm up to a 10-year frequency storm.
Right.
After that, water will begin to come through that outflow.
So along the same lines, the semi-pervious material, what is that going to be?
We haven't specified it exactly. It could be mulch, it could be pea gravel, you know, something that is going to provide a suitable surface for pedestrians to walk from the building to facilities that are north of the site. But it's not going to be concrete or asphalt or even porous asphalt.
Okay. And this is slightly off subject. Have you thought about security and safety with that trail and through the woodlands and views and those
You
kind
know,
of
it hasn't been the focus of my, but we could very easily do footpath lighting through there just to provide some lighting. But beyond that, I haven't given it much thought.
And I'm just
Right.
kind of thinking out loud about that.
Now that so I had a question about that footpath, and I appreciate your statement, as we found it, but the fact of the matter is this is a pretty degraded woodlot with a lot of invasive species, so I'm just curious. I don't know. I want to be able to make a decision about this, but I also feel like at this stage, there's a lot of decisions left to be made, and I'm just curious a little bit more about that path. So it's just taking people from that playground area to the street north. Are you thinking like an impervious path?
Yeah, it's impervious. Part of, and now we're going back to the master planning and zoning and planning folks, they wanted to encourage pedestrian connectivity, right?
Yeah.
So it was actually suggested, and we embraced the idea that we have some sort of ability that you could get to the hospital and the public works and a lot of those other social services
Yeah.
that are there without having to get in a car and drive there, right?
Okay. Yeah, so I guess I don't want to get to the point where we're asking you to landscape the woods or anything, but yeah, it's just, something to think about.
Chair Colwick, I also wanted to make a comment about that area because it was mentioned, but I wanted to make sure folks were clear about this. When the applicant's working with Public Services and the request by the city was made to make that sewer connection to the north, when you have an easement, it's going to be a substantial easement on either side of that new line that's there. So that's going to stay clear and it's not going to be buildable. And so it's just a really nice option to keep a pathway there. It also avoids residents having to go all the way around a block to get to the services they're looking at to the north. And I can't recall from the plan, but I'm guessing there's like a vegetation or reseeding, seeding plan that would be placed in that area because it's going to get quite excavated to put the new infrastructure in and then it would be backfilled.
Okay, and so that will be maintained by the city or the applicant?
There's no NFP requirement on reseeding it with, seeding the area with any specific mix, but
The Eagle regulates that, so I can tell you, we're obligated to restore the ground to its original condition, and there's a seed mix that we've specified. Jamie is right. The utility folks are going to want an area kept clear of trees, so that if the line ever has to be repaired. I think it's going to be a private lateral on site, so I think the ownership and the maintenance obligation is going to be by the owner of the property. It'll be treated like a house lateral. It's just unfortunate it has to run 200 feet instead of 50 feet out to the street.
Okay.
But the city engineer told us that there are plans to improve Lake Street, and there's more capacity in that sewer than there currently is in East Stockbridge. So that was their call and not our preference.
Okay.
One quick comment I'll make around that, which is obviously not required, but we think about this in publicly accessible space or natural areas and urban spaces, that a lot of our invasive species in urban areas are contained in the shrub layer. And so by going through invasive species removal or doing habitat restoration there, you might actually open up sight lines in terms of safety and that sort of thing for residents. So obviously not a requirement, but something to think about.
I have, before we get into the next phase of talking about this, I just wanted to comment and see if anyone else had any comments. So as far as the planting list, thank you very much for providing the species list and the arrangement. This is the best that we've seen so far in the existence of this board with
I'll
only...
pass that along to our landscape architect.
And we appreciate it because we do we do want native species, and we understand that obtaining some of the cultivars is a lot more realistic. So I think like a 1 to 10 cultivar to native species, I was happy with it, but I am curious for other people that, I guess, two parts. One is with deer herbivory in this area, there is a concern always with the native species planting and survival. So I'm just curious, once this housing development is all finished and the plants are there, will there be some assurances that those plants will be replaced? And if they don't make it, or if they're herbivorized?
Within the developed portion of the property? I mean, of
Yeah,
course.
so I'm talking about the landscaping,
Yeah, we're going to require our landscape contractor to provide a maintenance guarantee. Still, it'll be a 1 year or 2 year, and they'll have to come back and replant any new plantings that don't survive.
Great. And then my other part of the question was just if everyone's had a chance to look at that plant list and feels good about those plants' survival in that, occasionally inundated area, how we feel about that.
I was happy with it. I thought that it looked like some of the choices were directly from the tree list we provided as potential replacements, whether it was or not, unclear, but I thought they were good choices. Seems to have a decent variety so that if, something doesn't make it or a pest comes along, it doesn't knock out your entire canopy shade for your parking lot or something like that. Couple cultivars, but yeah, usually we see a lot more than that, so the native strains are appreciated, so I thought it was good.
Thank you. Yeah, your list was right on the desk when we came up with the planting plan.
It's good to hear, because we spent a lot of time.
It was great guidance. Again, I'm sincere when I say that the standards that have been written for development and redevelopment in Kalamazoo are top shelf.
I was just going to comment, you were mentioning if the site is inundated, but it sounds like they'll be raising it, so there might be less issue of flooding anyway. So, because, yeah, if these were going to get flooded regularly, I'd be a little concerned about them, but it sounds like there
Yeah, our
should be
new
less
planting
site.
shouldn't have wet feet.
Right. Okay. You could put a hawthorn in there if you want.
So noted.
Okay, I just want to give everybody, we've had a lot of questions and discussion. I just want to give everybody another minute to make sure they feel like they addressed everything. And I want to just ask Jamie a question, which is, if there are, I know at this stage in site development, there's a lot of proposed areas. I'm just curious, at what point do we get to see this again if there's a lot of changes? Because with site plan, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, so in this general configuration, we would, we might have some amendments that are proposed by other city staff. If there's any sort of significant change, and, what could I imagine? Sometimes it's the fire marshal changing some of the routing internally, some of the fire, that might be something that would change the site enough. I can't imagine at this point a building footprint changing. I think that the parking requirements have been met, so we would think that the dimensions of the parking lot would remain the same. That's why I wanted to put the condition in there of the stormwater engineer's approval. I think that might be one that can sometimes change and shift around, usually because of an NFP requirement. And so if staff saw the percent woodland preservation change significantly, we would want to bring that back to this board. But assuming that all of this plan is for the most part approved as you see it today, it's gone to site plan review, so it's been through pre-application, it's been through site plan review. Now the applicant is addressing a couple of the changes that staff had requested before they would go ahead and approve it. I think that what you see today is very, very close to, if not the plan that you're going to see finally approved. And then that site plan is good for another year before they break ground. I think it's about 1 year that you have to pull a permit. So again, I think with a significant natural features change, it would be brought back to this board. And the approval letter will always state that. It will say that the board approved by this majority vote this motion, and that if there's any significant changes throughout the site plan process before it gets its final approval, it could have to come back to the board.
Is that something we would put in our motion, or it's just a given?
It's just how we implement the code.
Just want to be clear. Yeah, again, another moment for board questions with our applicant before we move on to public comments regarding this development, of which I know we have some.
I guess I just want to, looking at the staff report, I just want to kind of make sure I'm understanding it correctly. This plan complies with NFP. The only place that it doesn't is, or not necessarily doesn't, but one protected tree will be removed. They are replanting at a greater ratio than is required, and the tree that's being removed is a non-native species. But everything else they comply with the wetland standard, the woodland protection standard, the plant selection standard. Staff will report on the storm water management. So it's really about one tree and whether, is that the
Right. And 75,
interpretation?
the way I heard it, 75% of woodland preserved.
Right.
Which is greater than the
Which
standard.
is greater than the
Yeah.
standard. Yep.
So yeah, the staff recommendation is for this board to approve because we feel it's met all of the standards in the zoning code. I think there's one thing that, the way the code is written, there's one thing that the board can always weigh in on is some of those cultivars, if they seem ask for that plan to be changed, for instance. And then we, as staff, rely on the stormwater engineer to verify all of the calculations to make sure they meet what's in the NFP code. And that's kind of happening concurrently right now with our city engineer.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
I'm not running away, so. if there's a need
You'll
to
be
bring
here.
me
You may
back,
be
all right.
needed still. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Next up, we have board comments. So if we have members of the public that are here and would like to come make a statement regarding this development, step up to the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes as timed. And we just ask that if you do come up to talk, you speak into the microphone as we are streaming. Yeah. Okay, maybe we don't. Anyone on the phones? Nolan?
None at this time.
Okay. Okay. Well, given that we've had an extensive discussion about this, I think that we can move on to a motion. One question I do have before we do that is, Frederickson, thank you, stated that the tree removal to be accurate on the drawing. Do we feel like that's something we need to include in the motion, given the woodland retention versus removal? Ask you all.
I guess it would still meet the NFP requirements if those trees were gone, but I appreciate and I agree with her comment that it should probably be represented differently in the future if the grading plan does show entering critical root zone. So I don't know if that's something that Jamie would be like a initial filter for staff, for applicants coming in, if that might just be an adjustment in the future, where if the grading plan intersects with the critical root zones, then we would count those individuals as lost.
Yeah, I can certainly make sure that we, staff, we ask for the application a couple of weeks ahead of time so we can then review, provide any comments, and get a revised copy back to you. I just did not catch that this time, but yeah, I'll make sure we keep a closer eye on that. One of the things that you did hear from the applicant is staff is trying to be a little more diligent about having the plans show where the tree protection fencing will go up. In part because that then helps flag to our inspectors on the ground that are there that needs to be up before permits would be issued. So I think they're always looking for the silt fencing because that's been a long established requirement. So we often would allow just a note on the plan that said that fencing will be erected, but now we're asking them to mark it on the plan. So I will also, when I look for that one, will look for any encroachment into that tree line or root zone of the tree line. And then also, Nolan and I, just as an aside, are looking at and would be presenting to you guys, hopefully here in the next quarter, a guide whereby it gives guidance to applicants both on the front end when they're putting together their application, but also on the back end. You know, it says you must construct this fencing within the code, but we think a guide that tells an applicant the timing of that installation, some of those details would be really helpful as well. And so I think we're going to help. The critical root zone has sort of been a delicate area that's been a little unclear how to work near and outside of. So I think there's a couple of ways we can improve it. We'll certainly keep an eye on that for plans that come forward to you all and recommend that those just, counted in the count to remove. If they can be saved, that's great. Often it's a little less clearing costs and more benefit.
I'd love to have applicants provided with more rare species survey timing suggestions as well. Yeah. But I think today, given that the amount of woodland retention and also the species of those trees, I think we can go ahead with the motion unamended. So can I entertain a motion to approve the NFP site plan for the project located at 209 East Stockbridge Street, subject to approval by the city's stormwater engineer?
So moved.
Thank you.
Support.
Great. And once again, before we vote, any further discussion from the board? I feel like we've...
I'll just say I appreciate the applicant's level of detail in the context of the site. Building with density, we obviously have a housing crisis as well as an environmental crisis, so it looks like we're addressing one without adversely impacting the other too bad. Using the existing footprint, plant list is good, exceeds the woodland standards, doing tree replacements that are not technically necessary to that level, so I appreciate that if the site has to be developed, it's, you know, potentially one of the best, that we could see, I think.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've had a motion and support, so now I think we'll do a roll call vote for this.
Yes. Chair Colwick.
Yes.
Frederickson.
Yes.
Fuller.
Yes.
Glasser.
Yes.
Leto.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Sylvester.
Abstain.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Motion passes. And yeah, again, thank you to our applicants for that presentation to help us make an informed decision. Finally, we're on to old business. So there's a letter to the Planning Commission regarding amendments to the NFP code in Chapter 50-6.2 of the City Zoning Code that needs to be written. So Jamie, do you want to fill in before I move on? Yeah, great.
So this is, again, old business because this board has been talking for a couple of meetings now about staff recommended amendments to Chapter 50. It's the larger city zoning code. In particular, it's really changing up some of and creating some new zone districts for commercial. However, it is, staff had been recommending some changes to the NFP code specifically. Those changes have gone through some iterations over the last several months, and if you go online to imaginekalamazoo.com, you can find what is starting to solidify as the recommendation that'll go forward to the Plan Commission. Plan Commission is going to continue to talk about that in August and most likely take action on that recommendation that they would vote on at their September meeting, so it's the first Thursday in September. And then that recommendation goes to City Commission, and that's the body that has the ability to change the zoning code. So one of the things, though, that has been brought up is, or one of the staff requests that I had that I wanted to bring forward to this board was the ability to, and I have it in the action there, I don't have a letter drafted. I wanted this board to be able to weigh in on that a little bit, but wanted to get your interest and hopefully action to authorize staff to work with the board chair to create a letter that would go to Planning Commission with this bundle of amendments, really just talking about the steps staff, like when staff came to this board and how the amendments that's coming forward has been shaped, I would say, by this board. I don't think you guys have to say that you wholesale wrote the whole changes. There's been some, because I think we've had so many iterations, I think there could be some confusion by either Planning Commission members or City Commission members whereby they've heard, that the standards are being reduced or the standards are being changed. And I think a letter that could maybe explain what parts of the code are being changed, which aren't the standards, but it's not substantially the standards, but certainly is the intent. And we talked a lot about that. So a letter that just explained, how many times this board discussed, at what meetings, and what were the outcomes. And then I think that the letter could point to, I would recommend we point to some examples where implementation and interpretation of the code has been challenging with the existing code, and why these changes would help improve that decision-making by this body. So I'd love to be able to have the chair's help in that, or if you guys want to delegate it to somebody else. If you feel comfortable with that, you could change the motion here if you want staff to bring it back for your final approval in August, or if you feel comfortable with a general letter, kind of a letter of support to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, my only comment is maybe, so as it stands, my motion is to, our motion is to authorize the staff to work with the board chair to submit a letter. I think I suggest changing that to maybe we all have a chance to review that letter as a board. Is that something we can do over email?
You could comment individually to me. I'd want to make
Okay.
sure we're not doing some sort of email thread that you're all like making decisions collectively, and that should be done in a public meeting. So, and I guess, Chair, I could touch bases with you on what like the final changes are from the feedback individually, and then you could make that decision if it feels like this letter seems, you know, I'm very comfortable with it, it reflects what happened in meetings. Or then you could make that decision too if you felt like, oh, it seems like we got a whole lot of feedback, let's bring it back to the meeting, if you felt like you wanted the whole board collectively to make any sort of decision.
Yeah, I guess I would like to change this from to submit a letter to draft a letter, and then maybe we can provide that letter to the rest of the board to look over. Is that okay?
Yep, you can make that change.
Everyone feel good about that?
So I wasn't at the last meeting when I know you talked about this language, but is it currently, as it's listed in the minutes, is that kind of the language that was settled on at the last meeting? The three-part intent?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not really a change in intent so much as a clarification and additional supporting language. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that some of the public conversation, though, has been around whether the intent of NFP was ever supposed to be like sort of a full preservation type intent. So I think the clarification to this board seems like it's not a change, it's what's always been the intent. But I think there's always been some gray in the way it was worded before. So if you weren't, you know, following along from the process right from the beginning, maybe it does feel a bit like a change. But I think it's the language we have right now is how this board has probably always been interpreting and applying it, and this is really matches that interpretation from the past.
But Ed, what you'll be submitting is what's in the minutes from the last meeting?
Yeah, let me check on those minutes.
Okay.
I'm pretty positive that's the exact language. That was the language suggested by the city planner and should be in the draft as it is today, but I will confirm that that draft says what is in these minutes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is this, should we do a vote on this, or?
Yep, you can ask for a motion and a support, and then you do not have to do a roll call vote. If you want to do a voice vote where everyone says yay or nay, you can do that, Chair.
Okay. So can I entertain a motion to authorize staff to submit a letter to the Planning Commission on behalf of the to draft a letter. I should have scribbled it out on here. I'm going to start over. Can I entertain a motion to authorize staff to draft a letter to the Planning Commission on behalf of the NFP Review Board regarding amendments to Chapter 50-6.2 of the City Zoning Code?
So moved.
Support?
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
In favor and against, say nay. Okay. Next is staff updates.
Actually, I was wondering if I could, over in the old business category, just make a comment or follow up on some topics we touched on a couple meetings ago regarding, one regarding erosion control and whether those additional standards would be of some kind of undue burden in terms of their costs. And I think there was going to be some follow up on that. And then the other one was the tree bank, basically the idea of mitigating a 36-inch tree with a 1-inch tree is not perfect. And so whether there was any option for some kind of tree bank, and we discussed there may be some legal hurdles or things that would make that not a possibility. But I just want to make sure we didn't totally lose those ideas.
Yeah, I don't have an answer about tree bank yet. I can certainly connect us to City Attorney's Office for some of that discussion. I will say that there are some proposed changes that will be coming forward, I think yet this year, to the public before they would be approved by the City Commission, whereby as part of the city's tree ordinance, which is separate from NFP, it's for trees that are owned by the public, so they're within public right-of-way or they're on public land. There's talk right now about having a sort of tree bank opportunity. I feel like if the city gets comfortable with and passes that, then maybe it's time for us to consider that for NFP. And we would be having a very similar update to the zoning code happening very beginning of next year, which would be the residential update on the zoning map. But again, we could dive into the standards if you guys felt like you wanted to explore that idea of a tree bank. And then we would hopefully have that framework set up so that like public services through the city's arborists could then handle those trees. I think that was always kind of the issue when NFP got started, is that we didn't have a mechanism whereby the city would take and make sure to plant those. We have since committed to 300 to 500 plantings per year through funded through the Foundation for Excellence is what's allowed that to happen. And then soil erosion and sediment control. Remind me again, Director Leto, was that talking about a specific section in NFP, or was that erosion control in general? And the reason I ask that is because I believe our erosion control and soil erosion and sedimentation control, SESC, is in a different part of our code that we aren't updating right now, but I didn't know if it was specific to an NFP section.
I think the conversation was initially around NFP sites and wildlife entanglement and the sort of fine mesh, allegedly degradable?
Degradable,
That's the
yeah.
word. And those they bunch up. They're kind of an eyesore. They don't seem to function, whether that was appropriate for NFP. And then I think you had the conversation about whether that would make sense for a citywide. Some of these things that we discussed, you had mentioned might make sense for a citywide ordinance rather than just NFP. So it was kind of an effort to see whether alternative options were as available or like absurdly cost prohibitive or anything like that.
Yeah, let me check again if where that code lives and if it's an opportunity to change, and if it is, then I can connect with you offline on if you have a suggestion for materials that we could look into.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay. Jamie, was that all for you for announcements? I think you just mostly
Yep,
answered.
that's it.
Okay. Any announcements from the board? Okay, with that, we will adjourn our meeting for today. Thank you all.
Fantastic.